made you sensitive to what is otherwise such a large-scale phenomenon?
Thanks, Shoma, and wonderful to be here in this audience. Well, personal experience would be the fact that I was involved in schools. I saw children very up close in front, and my own experiences as a mom, I think that made me realize that there's a lot of problems out there, but the awareness was so little around mental health that one really didn't know where to go to if one had an issue. And that's what really compelled me to get into this, because you realize that there was lack of awareness, the stigma was a lot, and even if there was awareness, even if one knew that one is going through an issue, you really didn't know where to go. So I think all this was the genesis of Empower, actually, and which was launched about 3 years ago, 4 years now in Jan. And I must say that when we did start, there was just no conversation around it whatsoever. The first press conference that we had, I had all of 2 press people coming in, and it was really dismal. So we've come a long way. I mean, now the fact that we can even have this conversation on a platform like this itself speaks volumes. But of course, a lot yet needs to be done.
So, we didn't have enough time to explore another aspect of Ambuj, which, made him stand out, was that around the time he was in military school, 11, 12 years old, he also began to understand that he had a bisexual identity, and that itself put a lot of pressure on him. He was experimenting, but that not fitting into a norm was an added pressure. And unfortunately, he's not here, but he has a beautiful thing to say. He says that today he's at great peace with that, because he's been able to connect with the feminine side of him, and he's very proud of that as well. Being the mother of 3 children, would you help us understand how important it is and how you have dealt with being a different kind of a mother for a different kind of child within your own home?
So I think all kids are very different, and each one has his own or her own potential, and I think as parents it's very important for us to really nurture that. I think we all tend to want to fit in, and we all want our kids to be following the normal trajectory of academics, doing well academics, and then either joining the family work or being a professional. But one has to realize that every child is different. Every child comes with his own journey, which is already marked out, and displays different potentials and different talents. And as parents and being their caregivers, we have to identify and nurture that talent and then help the child grow along that. And that's what we have done as parents, because my daughter, Ananya, is in music. She's a pop singer. So she's following her own path. My son is a cricketer. My youngest is still in school. So I think the idea was just to let them explore and be their own individuals, and let them just let their personalities blossom in the manner that was working out best for them.
So I'm going to come back to explore a bit of that, whether that is individual to you, and even, you've said somewhere that just being Neerja Birla from the outside, all of that looks wonderful, but that really social success or material success is no immunity against personal distress. And so whether there's been any pressure even for you to open up space within your home space or your community, all of that. I'll come back to that, but because there's this whole other area that is again an area of silence, is corporate stress. You've been trying to open that a little bit. Will you talk to us about that experience? Is it easy? Are people being responsive to you?
So actually we've been trying to open that, not a little bit, but a lot of it. And unfortunately, not been very successful at it. So we at Empower, we're working in 4 different target audiences: schools, colleges, NGOs, and corporates. And I must say that the corporate section is the most difficult ones to crack. They just, I don't know why, but it's just very difficult to get through to them. The writing is on the wall, loud and clear. Everyone has issues at the workplace. Workplace depression is very common. 1 out of 4 people experience it. A lot of anxieties, a lot of panic, but yet somehow corporates just put it on the back burner. We've really been trying very hard to break that. We've been trying to approach them with our workshops, offering them cells or even bespoke counseling sessions, but somehow they're just not open. And I really don't understand why. I mean, is it because they just want to see numbers? But even if that is the case, one has to realize that if mentally you're feeling unwell, there is no way that you can perform because, at the end of the day, the mind is the most important thing. So it is bound to affect your productivity and efficiency. So why not look at that and why not be mentally well so that your bottom line increases?
Yeah, in fact, we were talking earlier, and the young people earlier mentioned it, but that idea of dysfunctionality, if in the workspace you're not feeling well, you may under pressure be performing there, but you come home angry, you're unable to be empathetic. It has a kind of cascading impact all the way back to your children, and it's just like a virus going through society. So in all the work that you've been doing, what is the common attitudes you found when you're trying, you mentioned 4 target communities that you're trying to create awareness. What is the pushback attitude that you're finding in each of them?
Yeah. So, just coming back to the corporate bit of it, I think what also we need to understand is that, high achievers can also be highly depressed individuals, and the two can coexist. You can be extremely doing very well at work, can be very successful, and yet be mentally ill. So I think when that kind of awareness sets in, I think that will really help open the dialogue in the corporate workplace as well. And I think the also important point to understand is that just because you're mentally unwell doesn't make you less successful at your workplace. So I think if we can marry the two in our minds, I think we'll be able to open up the dialogue. Coming back to your question of pushbacks, I think it's pretty much the fact that there was lack of awareness. And then there is lack of acceptance. I think as individuals, as humans, we just tend to feel very vulnerable, and we just feel that if we are mentally unwell, it makes us very weak. But that's not the case. So I think if we are able to understand that, we'll be able to accept the situation much better.
So let me ask you if you've at least had a primary step of success, which is in your own husband's company. Have you managed to shift the cheese a little bit within the Aditya Birla group? Have you convinced your husband at least?
So I've convinced my husband, but I think I have to yet convince the other people. But we're getting there. We'll get there slowly. I'm sure about that. We're opening little by little. We'll get there.
I hope we've created a little bit of a pressure group today.
I hope so too.
Yeah. When you've been through all of these experiences and you've been dealing with professionals as well, is there a kind of playbook of strategies of coping that you would like to communicate? When people are suffering from depression, who should they turn to, and what are some of the attitudes they could incorporate?
So I think the first thing is to create awareness about mental health, because like what we saw in the film as well, the lack of awareness is so high that one doesn't even know what you're dealing with. So for your own self, you could be you could be a highly depressed individual for years and not realizing it, because you just say, oh, that's just the way I am, and you carry on with life. But that's not the fact. The fact is that you may be having depression as an illness. So I think creating awareness around it is most important. Understanding what are the red flags, because we all are on a spectrum. But it's, when symptoms come in the way of your daily living, when it hinders that, when it sort of incapacitates you to have a regular routine, is when you need to really understand that it's an issue. So I think understanding the red flags for yourself as well as for people around, initiating dialogue around it so that, again, it becomes more accepting. And then, of course, to know that it's okay not to be okay, but it's not okay not to seek help. So you must go and seek professional help, because you will feel better. And the same way, if somebody comes to you trying to tell you that they're having a bad day, or they've been having anxiety for days at end, of course you must listen to the person, because in a non-judgmental manner, because that's the best thing that you can do. But after that, I think you need to advise and suggest that the person must take professional help. I think seeking professional help is very important.
When you're speaking of help, as I said at the beginning of this session, that we're a country of competing crises, that there is such a chronic infrastructure problem around mental health in our country, that we have I think almost 60 million or more who are on that spectrum of mental health that needs intervention, but we have barely 20,000 beds in this entire country that are committed to people suffering from mental health. There are barely 1,500 nurses, 3,000 psychiatrists. It's like minuscule, the infrastructure around mental health.
Yeah,
so is that something that you're engaging with?
Absolutely, the treatment gap is huge. To add to your statistics, we only have 43 mental health hospitals, which is again very dismal. And also, of the people who are actually suffering from mental health, there's only about 70 to 80% of them actually do not seek mental help, do not seek help. So there's a very small proportion of the people who are actually suffering who actually seek help. And the reason for that is also because of infrastructure. Like you said, the number of psychiatrists, the number of psychologists, mental health hospitals, the treatment gap is just huge. So until we don't try and bridge that gap, until we don't get into capacity building, we're not going to really see an end to this issue at all.
In fact, all the young people, even the ones on the film, spoke about just how, both Amit and Shelja Sen have made such a difference in young people's life that one can't emphasize this strongly enough about having good help.
Absolutely.
But just the two other things. One is that, this sense that we've all been through stress in our childhood. We weren't depressed. Why is this generation suffering such acute depression? Have you seen any sort of intergenerational change? Is there something that's changed in society which was different in our time or your time or earlier behind? Or is it just that we didn't recognize it earlier?
So I believe it's multifactorial, as in that, of course, the present generation is undergoing a lot of pressure, much more than what we went through. So the world is becoming a global village, really. And now, like we used to, only compete with our friends or at most friends. But now our kids are really competing with kids from other countries. So, the exposure has become so much more. And social media, if in the right balance, is a boon, but it can also be a bane. And I think the difference between the virtual world and the real world is what the kids are trying to do, is also adding a lot of pressure. And why only children? Even for us, we're trying to live and project a perfect life which really doesn't exist, and the other people, the consumers who are consuming that, are also trying to ape a life that doesn't exist. So I think that difference is so wide, that is also creating a lot of stress. And I think the fact that now we are also, we are a working generation, our parents are not a working generation. Our kids are going through a lot of stress. The exam stress has increased. They're expecting to really be good at everything that they are doing. Expectations from them are much more than what they were from us. So I think it is multifactorial, and it definitely is. It's a huge change from what we were when we were growing up.
So I asked you about whether you've managed to impact your husband, but I want to ask you whether you've managed to impact your immediate social circle. Is there more conversation? Is there more awareness? Is there more empathy because you've been speaking up so much?
Absolutely. It's a huge difference. So in fact, it's not a nice thing, but it is a nice thing because at least now I get a call almost on every basis from somebody, either a relative or a friend, asking me something about an issue that their child is going through or a relative going through, and asking me for, how do they get in touch with Empower, or who would be the right psychologist. So that itself is an indication of how conversation is opening up. And I think within our own circles also, people are definitely opening up. People are talking more about it. It's just becoming more common jargon, really, to say, so-and-so is depressed, or I'm depressed, or I'm having a panic attack, or I'm having anxiety. It definitely is becoming a much more common place.
Nisha, when we started the session, I said this is because it affects the very nucleus of your well-being, which is your personal self. And so in a sense, it's class, caste, agnostic, religion, language agnostic. But today, when we're opening up spaces, again, is there a kind of privilege barrier in it that at least we're opening up spaces only for the well-to-do? In your work, have you got any sense of how lower economic classes are suffering from this, and what is the status of their capacity to access help?
So, absolutely. At Empower, we also have a foundation actually which caters to people from the lower socioeconomic, who are economically challenged, and we're seeing huge numbers come in there. The problems are a little different because the causes are a little different, whether it could be domestic violence or alcohol abuse, but it's there. The emotions are the same, the feelings are the same, the diagnoses are the same. So they are also having a lot of issues with depression and anxiety, panic, psychosis, schizophrenia. So that remains the same. The causes could be very different, but the numbers are huge in both segments, and we do cater to them as well. because I do believe that something like mental health and mental wellness should be open to everybody. Why only the privileged?
Thank you very, very much, Neerja. Again, it's the best possible thing is to use privilege to really open up doorways for others, and you're doing that. So thank you very, very much. Thank you, everybody, for listening, and for all of you, especially Ambuj and Arsha. And just to reiterate some of the themes is that the first response is dismissal, but the fact that all of us inhabit personal landscapes of pain and no outward circumstance explains how somebody responds to stimuli differently. And so empathy and the space to talk, be respected and be taken seriously is the first stepping stone. And if we can open our eyes to those around us who are in pain, perhaps a bit of that positive cascade impact can start happening. Again, thank you very much for listening into this session, and I hope it's open doors for all of us. Thank you, Neerja. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Neerja Birla, for lending your voice to this very important cause. Can I request you to please stay on stage? Thank you, Shoma. Can we invite Mr. Shiv Kumar Dalmia, Chairman of NL Dalmia Educational Society, to please present Mrs. Birla with a token of our deep gratitude and appreciation.